How did Walter White defeat Gus Fring? Walter White faces numerous threats to his life, but perhaps none more formidable than Gustavo "Gus" Fring, a meticulous and calculated drug lord. Despite their tumultuous relationship, Gus never eliminates Walter when he seemingly has ample opportunity to do so. One of the most significant factors preventing Gus from killing Walter is the mutual dependence between them. Gus recognizes Walter's exceptional chemistry skills, which are crucial for producing high-quality crystal blue methamphetamine. In the illicit drug trade, product quality is paramount, and Walter's expertise ensures that Gus's operation remains highly profitable. On the other hand, Walter relies on Gus for the distribution and protection of his product. This mutual dependence creates a delicate balance of power between the two titans, a balance that could flip at the drop of a hat. Picture this: a high-stakes illegal meth empire where the key to fortune isn't just a recipe, it's a chemist who can spin drugs into gold. Gus Fring, as cunning as they come, understood one thing clearly. Walter White wasn't just a chemist, he was a chemistry virtuoso, a conductor of pure blue symphonies. Killing Walt would be like taking an axe to the David of Michelangelo. Utter insanity. In the twisted tango of the drug trade, chemistry isn't enough. You need muscle, distribution, and a pinch of fear to keep everyone in line. Gus Fring knew that axing Walter meant replacing him with a chemist who almost certainly would not be able to replicate the signature blue, or worse, drawing the attention of the feds like a moth to a flame. Gus, understanding that Walter would not only jeopardize the consistency of his product, but also bring unwanted attention from law enforcement. This is evident when he allows Walter to live after the incident involving the murder of his own henchman. Despite his anger and frustration, Gus realizes that eliminating Walter would disrupt the entire operation, and he cannot afford such a risk. But how did Gus come to this realization? Was it his own genius? No, he was manipulated and convinced by the mastermind, Heisenberg. The central thought line for why Gus didn't kill Walt has less to do with Gus's wants and needs, and more about how cunning, calculated, and clever Walter was with his actions and words. When Jesse's vendetta against the dealers responsible for Tomas's death reached its boiling point, it was solely Gus Fring's respect for Walter and Walter's unwavering support for Jesse that prevented a grim outcome. However, it's important to note that Gus's respect was not blind adulation. In a dramatic turn of events, when Walter took matters into his own hands and killed two of Gus's trusted street associates to safeguard Jesse, it didn't sit well with Gus. In fact, it led Gus to initiate a manhunt for Jesse, who had wisely gone into hiding with the assistance of Saul Goodman and Walter's support. Surprisingly, Walt managed to convince Gus of his actions, explaining the necessity of the killings and assuring that there would be no further incidents. To demonstrate his commitment to cooperation, Walt even had Gale, whom he had initially fired to protect Jesse, reinstated as his assistant. Nevertheless, their relationship was no longer as harmonious as it once was. As Walter's suspicions grew, Walter harbored a deep-seated mistrust towards Gale, fearing that Gus intended to replace him with Gale. This ominous premonition was confirmed when Gus, in a telling encounter, questioned Gale about his readiness to take over from Walt. While Gale's response remained ambiguous, it was enough to spur Gus into action. Subsequently, Gus dispatched his enforcers, Mike and Victor, with the grim task of eliminating Walt. At this point, it seemed like the end of the line for Walter White. However, what people often overlook is the transformation of Walter into his fearsome alter ego, Heisenberg. It was Heisenberg, not Walter, who possessed the cunning and resolve to ensure his and Jesse's survival in this treacherous world. Heisenberg's ability to adapt and strategize ultimately allowed him to outmaneuver seemingly insurmountable threats and maintain his grip on the perilous criminal underworld. Gus had more balls in the air than a juggler on a caffeine overdose. He was not only running a drug empire, but also engaged in a life and death battle with the merciless Mexican cartel led by Hector Salamanca. Walter White, well, he was the perfect smoke and mirrors act. His erratic antics and volatile personality made him a lightning rod for cartel rage. Gus wasn't just selling drugs. He was peddling dreams of power and control. He dangled the carrot of autonomy in front of Walter, making him believe that he had a say in the operation. By stroking Walt's ego and keeping him hooked on the allure of power, Gus ensured that he remained an obedient puppet on the cartel's string, rather than a loose cannon. Gus understands that Walter's desire for control and recognition can be channeled to serve his own interests. He offers Walt a semblance of autonomy within the drug operation, allowing him to believe that he has a say in the business decisions. By doing so, Gus keeps Walt engaged and invested in the business, preventing him from becoming a threat. Or so he thought. Gus Fring is known for his meticulous planning and extreme caution. He rarely makes impulsive decisions and always calculates the risks involved. Killing Walter White outright would not align with Gus's methodical approach. Throughout the series, Gus uses fear as a powerful tool to control those around him, and Walter is no exception. He understands that Walter is more valuable to him as a fearful subordinate than as a dead enemy. By allowing Walter to live, while simultaneously keeping him in check through intimidation and threats, like taking him out to the desert and threatening to kill his whole family, this helped the Chicken Man maintain his dominance and control over his partner. But it may have been these exact threats that caused Heisenberg to start plotting his own plans for Gus and his empire. Despite his ruthless nature, Gus Fring is portrayed as a character with a certain moral code and a sense of ethics. While he is undoubtedly a criminal, he maintains a facade of respectability through his legitimate business operations, such as Los Pollos Hermanos. Additionally, Gus's pragmatism is evident in his ability to weigh the costs and benefits of his actions. Killing Walter might eliminate an immediate threat, but it would also carry significant risks and consequences. Gus prefers to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries in the drug trade with precision and subtlety rather than resorting to overt violence whenever possible. Breaking Bad is often likened to a high-stakes chess game, with the characters strategically positioning themselves on the board. In this intricate game, Walter White and Gus Fring are the primary players, each making calculated moves to outmaneuver the other. They are the grandmasters orchestrating their moves with the finesse of seasoned pros. Gus wasn't about to tip the board and flip over the pieces, but Heisenberg was. Heisenberg, the ever-unpredictable wildcard, was the chaos factor that made the game thrilling. He was a rogue pawn, unpredictable and cunning. Killing him would be like taking a flamethrower to a perfectly set chessboard. It might solve a problem, but it would ruin the game. Throughout the series, Walter's ability to adapt, scheme, and surprise kept Gus on his toes. He knew that eliminating Walter would disrupt the delicate balance of power and strategy he had worked so hard to maintain. So like any grandmaster, he kept his opponent in the game, even if it meant enduring the occasional check. Walter's ability to adapt and think on his feet frequently catches Gus off guard. Killing Walter would remove this dynamic element from the game and potentially disrupt the careful strategies Gus has devised. Thus, Gus may have seen more value in keeping Walter as an opponent, even if a dangerous one. But with all these calculated factors that Gus employed, he didn't account for one thing: Heisenberg. While Gus was busy plotting Walter's demise, he was completely blind to the wisdom, cunning, and persuasion that Heisenberg possessed. Gus Fring's decision not to send Walter to the great meth lab in the sky earlier in Season 3 is a decision I'm sure he regrets. The short answer as to why Gus didn't kill Walt is because Walter ended up killing him first. By keeping Walter alive, Gus ensured that the cartel remained focused on Walter rather than on dismantling his own drug empire. That strategic advantage brought Gus time to outmaneuver his rivals and consolidate his power. But yet again, Heisenberg was one step ahead. Walter was able to go behind Gus's back and play both sides. He found out that Hector, a vengeful, crippled drug lord, desperately wanted revenge against Gus. So he used his two enemies against each other, killing two birds with one stone. On his best game, Gus would not have walked into the nursing home so carelessly, especially with this cat-and-mouse game between him and Walter White. Gus had already sent men to White's home, men who came perilously close to taking White out. But Gus wasn't thinking things through. He was enjoying his revenge. He had sent Lucius in to scan the premises for any problems. Once he had gotten the word that it was all clear, he strutted in, eager to enjoy the final stroke in his game of revenge against the Salamancas. That's why he didn't see what he should have seen. Some may even argue that Walt didn't beat Gus so much as exploit Gus's vulnerability. By getting personally and emotionally caught up in the moment, Gus managed to walk in and become an accessory to his own murder. Walt's best move was in thinking of an angle nobody had considered, that Hector himself would take out Gus. Walt managed to rig Hector up so he could have the final word. Walt created a murder machine. The war between Gus Fring and Walter White is but one piece of a grand puzzle that reminds us that in this world, nothing is black and white. It's all 50 shades of sky blue. Gus's decision not to kill Walter White was ultimately just another event in a series of events that led to the full creation and realization of Heisenberg.